in our stressy lives, feeling like a child is wonderful and it's an escape, but damn, it makes us vulnerable. Our defenses come down. A sort of psychological immaturity may temporarily pervade us while we are being love bombed. Not in a bad way, but in a sort of giggly, let's go make snow angels way, right?
The term we're going to take on is love bombing. So hold on to your hats because many of you know what this feels like. When we think about love bombing, we're reminded that we were raised on fairy tales and we grew up into watching rom-coms, romantic comedies as it were. These themes create unrealistic expectations and skewed our perceptions. All of those fairy tales and all of those romantic comedies can often sort of twist what we think a courtship is actually supposed to look like. I've heard this story so many times. Boy meets girl, or boy meets boy, or girl meets girl, however your story begins. Think about the themes I'm about to talk about. Some may apply for you, but others may not. Love bombing has certain phrases that are typically associated with it. So some of these phrases are things like, we had a magical connection. We had the most amazing first date. It was a whirlwind courtship. We took so many amazing trips. We spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week together for 2 straight weeks right after our first date. Before I knew it, I was meeting his family. I really thought it's because he was really seeing me as a keeper. Oh, my lease is up. Let's just move in together because we're already spending 24 hours a day together and it would make more economic sense. You remember some of those phrases, some of you do at least. Love bombing can be very Instagrammable, with people seeing your travel pictures from your new relationship, or nights out at those impossible to go places, or extravagant picnics, or amazing gifts. Love bombing really links into the fact that the charm, charisma, confidence, and cleverness of the narcissist all draw you in. Narcissists are so well put together in so many cases. They tick the boxes. And that's all part of the love bombing as well. There may even be some envy. So flowers will be sent to work, big vases on multiple days. Or flowers are sent to the apartment you share with roommates or your family. People start gauging and comparing their ordinary relationships against what is unfolding to be your rather grandiose experience. And everyone is sort of excited and maybe even a little jealous. During the love bombing phase, people will say that they felt like they were put on a pedestal. And as we know, pedestals are very bad places to live because you can fall off and get hurt. It can be a fantasy for any of us to live on a pedestal for a minute, but it's not good for us. First of all, it does hurt when we fall off. And secondly, it is simply part of the narcissist's grandiose fantasy. By putting you up on a pedestal, they are not only creating a false narrative, you become part of the unrealistic, grandiose fantasy. And since it is just that, a fantasy, at some point, reality is going to stick its head in and you, I guarantee it, will be knocked off of that pedestal. For many people who have been love bombed, falling off the pedestal and wondering if they would ever get back on that pedestal was a significant and memorable moment in the relationship, and one that set a tone for the devaluation and the discarding that was about to happen. But in the midst of the love bombing, you were actually seeing red flags. You already had the sense that the relationship was moving too fast. You may notice that your narcissistic partner, that you don't know is narcissistic yet, was getting angry really quickly, or that they were incredibly sensitive. But you do what a lot of people do in these relationships, especially when they're being love bombed. You gaslight yourself, and other people gaslight you too. People around you may say things like, "Come on, you really are afraid of commitment. Finally, you have someone who's paying attention to you, and you still are suspicious of them." They may minimize your red flags because everything else looks so good. You're living the fairy tale, right? Who says no to that? So you stay in the relationship and you start ignoring the red flags even when they pile up. You deny your own instincts. You recognize that it has been an amazing experience. And obviously, all relationships have hard parts to them, right? You've waited your whole life for someone who is attentive and romantic, and now you're questioning it? You're questioning the fairy tale after always wondering if it would ever come? So people tell you, "Oh, come on, this is your issue. Stop looking for problems. You're living the dream." But alas, love bombing doesn't last forever. One day, you stop being tense while you're being love bombed, because a lot of people really do think it's too good to be true. And you start accepting the love bombing, and you believe it is true. And then you finally exhale and give yourself over to the whole love bombing fantasy. You go all in, and you start to actually believe in the relationship. And the minute you do that, the minute your guard goes down in that way, it's like the narcissists have a homing device, and then the climate shifts. Love bombing usually takes about 6 to 12 weeks, sometimes less, but rarely does it last much longer than that. Once it is perceived by the narcissist that you are all in, that's the day the game changes. What happens first is that the devaluing begins. It seems that all of that moonlight and roses and nights out and attention start getting substituted by someone who intensely sees your faults, who minimizes you, who gaslights you, who devalues you. And then after that, after devaluation, always comes the discard. The flowers definitely stop showing up. The texts may not be as frequent, and when they do come, they're sort of angry and questioning where you are and what you're doing. The trips may still happen, but they're probably a lot more uncomfortable. But that bright, sunny feeling that you had, that you were caught in this once-in-a-lifetime love story, not only fades, it is often replaced now by someone who is more often than not angry, cruel, invalidating, gaslighting. You know the whole script. But you saw some of this coming. You saw some of the red flags, but you thought, maybe there's a red flag, maybe this whole fantasy is going to last, but now that day is here. So you try to work backwards, and you start blaming yourself and believe that there is actually something you can do to bring the love bombing days back. And before you know it, you are caught in the cycle of the narcissistic relationship. It can almost feel like an addiction because you're still trying to run back and get that high. Love bombing can often leave people forever sort of stuck in the early weeks or months of the relationships for decades. I have talked with many people who have been married for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years in neglectful, cruel, and invalidating relationships, and they still hold on to those love bombing weeks and will acknowledge that they still wait for that person to show up again, that they still think they're going to have those magnificent nights in Miami, or that amazing night that they spent all night talking, or the amazing picnic. They think it's all going to come back. Some of you watching this will say, there really wasn't a love bombing phase in your narcissistic relationship. And that doesn't surprise me. It's actually more common than you think that there isn't love bombing. It doesn't always happen. I'm not even sure that it always typically happens. Some narcissistic relationships pretty much suck and are mediocre from the jump, from the very beginning. And people who may hold narratives that they don't deserve any better from a relationship will often endure those sort of non-love bombing, unhealthy relationships from the very beginning. Here's the challenge, that in many, many narcissistic relationships, love bombing doesn't happen just one time, because so much of what happens in narcissistic relationships is cyclical. For many people, they may get really burned out or disgusted by how poorly that they're being treated in the relationship, so they leave. And in some of these cases, the love bombing starts again. It's sort of a form of hoovering, right? To draw you back in. And in fact, that can feel really powerful and sadly, in a pathological way, sort of loved. I am actually so wonderful and so important to my narcissist that now, when they sort of sensed I was slipping away, they do really love me. So now they're fighting for me. Not quite. Narcissists really don't like abandonment. They don't like losing. And they typically want to maintain the facade of a relationship. So if you work for them, they may want to keep you around. Their core insecurity means that you leaving them may activate them to start love bombing again. But please notice that in none of this love bombing and none of these other cycles have they attempted to engage with you in a meaningful, empathic, and intimate conversation. Or were they genuinely empathic or self-aware with you about the relationship you're having with them? No. They just start love bombing again. They say, hey, let's just go to a resort and try to have sort of like a second honeymoon, or let's get this going again. Or they just start buying you expensive gifts. And that is the thing that's meant to draw you back in. Once the love bombing starts again, then you may forget that no, you never did have those meaningful conversations. And then you get sucked into it all over again. You make the classical mistake that so many people make in a narcissistic relationship. You make the assumption, oh, he changed, she changed, she finally gets it. And then you go back in, and here we go again. Devalue, discard, contempt. You know the cycle. For many people, you would think that after the second love bombing cycle, that you would get it. But this can go on for years, over and over again. And you may even find yourself almost getting addicted to the cycle. Love bomb, excitement, devalue, discard, okay, you're losing the high, and you go back in. One thing that does happen is that the love bombing starts to get weaker over time. The initial 6-week love bomb, the second time around, may just be a few weeks. And the third or fourth time around may just be a few days. Even the gifts and stuff start becoming less compelling, the experiences, all of that. You've been living on crumbs for so long that even a few flowers and a mediocre dinner out and a handful of gifts is enough to keep you in this toxic game. Now, another element to remember about the love bombing phase is that it may be a prelude to a very controlling relationship. Love bombing isn't always just about gifts and fancy experiences. It can also be about the all-encompassing required communication and time together. In this kind of sort of controlling love bombing experience, we'll see these sort of obsessive texting behavior. They may seem benign enough at first. Good morning every morning, good night every night, lots of texts in the middle. How are you? Where are you? What are you up to? Who are you with? What are you eating? Where are you in the city? What are you doing in the house? It may even feel engaging and perhaps even a little sweet in the beginning. Someone wants to know all about your life. But then you may find that they start getting angry when you don't respond to them in a timely manner. They start behaving on almost suspicious. And you just write it off as early relationship jitters. They're a little nervous. They know that I live near where my ex-boyfriend lives or something like that. These days, so many people find dating so challenging because they're accustomed to partners who ghost them and who disappear and who are non-communicative and who are non-communicative and who go days without responding. And as a result, the constant availability of a love-bombing partner can actually be experienced by some people as reassuring rather than being experienced as controlling or menacing. The insistence of some narcissists that we spend our time with them all the time, even to the neglect of spending time with friends and family, may just feel like you're somehow in this intense sort of runaway love story, rather than seeing that what's happening to you over time is that you're becoming isolated from other supports. And because most of our traditional conceptions of love bombing are often focused on the big gestures, we can forget that that sort of obsessive need for contact and where are you, what are you doing, and who are you with, that also does fall under the rubric of love bombing. And the manipulative quality of narcissistic relationships can leave you so confused that in the blink of an eye, you're trapped. You don't recognize that they're, why do you need to go out with your friends? Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to do that? Then before you know it, boom, you realize you're in the box. So why do narcissists love bomb? Because it's part of their defensive use of grandiosity. And for this reason, because it is a part of grandiosity, many times covert narcissists who don't have such flashy grandiosity, they're the ones who often don't begin with a love bombing phase. Their grandiosity isn't as focused on creating the fantasy. Their grandiosity is more of, I'm so great and how come the world doesn't see it? Love bombing is very much a part, though, of the grandiose defense we see in narcissism. If they turn the early phases of the courtship into a big, fat fairy tale, it serves several purposes. It protects their insecurity and their fragile ego through the grandiosity. So their feeling is if the relationship looks good, then it must be good. It also plays into a deeper and darker part of the narcissist's insecurity, their insecurity that they will actually be rejected. And so they get a sense of control. If they really do a full court press, spend enough money, make enough fancy plans, make the whole thing interesting, engaging, distracting, and dazzling enough, then nobody would say no, right? It's like that insecure little kid that has lots of great toys, and the other kids are only friends with him because of the toys, not because of him. The love bombing then becomes a grandiose defensive play to quickly attract and trap narcissistic supply. And then, because of the narcissist's general contempt for any kind of deep intimacy, they will then devalue and ultimately discard the narcissistic supply that was willing to hang out with them and willing to stick around, but they'll discard it when the relationship actually starts to go deeper or needs to go deeper, or because the narcissistic supply does get so stale. So it often feels like an in and out push-pull sort of cycle. Also, narcissists hate the idea that the only reason they're liked is because of money, so it sets up a rejection dynamic. Now the question is, though, are some people actually more vulnerable to love bombing than others? Maybe. Some of this is related to how we portray romantic relationships, the very fairy tales that people have been raised on, and the gaslighting of the world in general. In fact, we tend to be more dubious about relationships that start really, really slow. And it doesn't help that people don't know about this dynamic. And this is why understanding love bombing and related dynamics becomes so important. Once you understand love bombing, you are so much better prepared to see it for what it is, and also be able to drown out the voices that say, oh, you're so lucky to be in this romantic fantasy. You start to learn, not so much. Other vulnerabilities may be seen in people who come from families where they didn't feel seen or heard, or they experienced narcissistic abuse in their families of origin. Against that backdrop of basically being invalidated and being invisible, love bombing can be so seductive, because for the person in that relationship, they feel overwhelmingly seen and heard in a way they never have before. One question I often receive is, why? Why do they love bomb? Again, it is that core insecurity. They're often not even thinking about it. It's almost like they only know one game. At a basic level, just getting to know them as a person, even by their deep unconscious estimation, would obviously not be enough. And again, that's sort of the sad core insecurity. So they put on that grandiose show to protect their insecurity. Another thing that's interesting is that the challenge and the gamesmanship that they always need to win is what keeps them at it until they very confidently feel like they have you. Then, once they have you, they'll often engage in a sort of tragic, dismissive contempt for you. Once they have you, then there's a devaluation and then the discard. Many people might hear this and think it is actually quite sad that at the core of it, the narcissist actually doesn't feel lovable. But you turning yourself into a psychological punching bag isn't going to magically illuminate them to the wonders of love. And I can almost promise you that in the long term, it is going to psychologically harm you. While love bombing almost always happens in romantic or intimate relationships, when it does happen, it's in those kinds of spaces. Believe it or not, love bombing can actually happen in other relationships. For example, in work relationships, in friendships, or even in family relationships. It is that dynamic of trying to intensely drawing people in with grandiose gestures and then discarding them. When it happens repeatedly in a relationship, we can actually feel foolish. Doesn't matter if it's a romantic partner or not. It's like falling for the same stupid joke over and over and over again. That idea of love bombing is that intensive beginning that's followed again by devaluation and dismissiveness, and perhaps in some cases discarding. The dynamic of love bombing is a classical narcissistic relationship dynamic. So before you judge yourself for falling for it, recognize that we're all vulnerable to this. All of us grew up with the fantasy of wanting the fairy tale. And sometimes it wasn't even just the fairy tale. We just wanted someone to see us and get us. But it's my hope that now that you fully understand it, hopefully you can get ahead of it or get out of it before you get hurt. As fun as love bombing can be, and maybe you even want to write it out for a few weeks, pay attention to this dynamic, particularly if it feels like it's quite controlling. The earlier you can exit yourself from this dynamic, the safer you'll be. And one day you're going to recognize that those slow starting relationships, things that start with a cup of coffee and maybe you don't need to be in touch every day, that's often where the relationships that turn into keepers happen.
How many of you were like, I actually kind of enjoyed the love bombing and now I feel gross because I liked the love bombing? If that's you, drop it in the comments, let us know, and let's break this down. What is this experience survivors have that they feel actually gross and feel bad because they think back and they're like, I kind of liked how the love bombing made me feel. Let's break this down. And if you're new to this channel, please subscribe. We'd love to have you join. This is the place to learn everything you want to know about narcissistic relationships. So you're in a narcissistic relationship, and when that relationship turns dark, and it always turns dark, and you see it for the invalidating mess it was, many survivors I've talked to have said, I kind of feel gross or bad. Like, I enjoyed the love bombing part. Not even that people were like, ooh, I love the gifts, and I love the fancy stuff, but they loved the sense, all of us love that sense of being desired. Now, desiring other people is something that narcissistic folks do better than anyone. When they aren't making you feel bad, they can make you feel really good. saying things like, you're so special, you're the most beautiful person in the world, I'm so lucky to be walking down the street with you, you're so cool, you're so awesome. And they cement it just as you're finding yourself getting so lost in the haze of how good it all feels, feeling so attractive, feeling so desirable. They pull back. And now you're craving this desire. You'll anything to get it back. So then you put up with more and more of their bad behavior. And you see that cycle, right? So when people look back at the relationship and they're asked, how did you find yourself drawn into this mess in the first place? This person's a jerk. What attracted you to them? Why did you keep it going when the red flags were popping up? You know all the survivor questions. Many survivors will say, or won't say, and they'll feel guilty or ashamed about it, but they'll say, it felt good. Again, and then feel guilty or ashamed for that. But it's true. The self-shaming and the guilt for being a human being is a big part of the challenges of survivorship from these relationships. I've yet to meet the person who doesn't like to be complimented or to be with someone who leaves them feeling attractive and desirable. That's human. And for people with trauma-bonded histories, the idea that someone could be all in with them and then at times disappear or be invalidating is actually the roadmap for love that many of us received early in our lives. Most survivors of narcissistic relationships have trained themselves to subsist on emotional breadcrumbs for a long time, like emotional camels in a way. Now, the dynamic can be greatly magnified if the narcissistic person you were involved with gets involved in something more scandalous. They break the law, they harm someone else, they behave badly in a job. Because then people are even looking at you more sideways, thinking like, why were you with this person who does these bad things? Survivors will even question it for themselves and will look back at the beginning when the narcissistic person did leave them feeling special and attractive, beautiful, chosen. And then that can really leave survivors feeling foolish for falling for a con. But it was real to you, and that makes it real. I have to remind all of you that no matter how much you may know about narcissism or even psychopathy, you still get played even with that information. Because if our red flag radar was that sensitive, we would never get much past hello with a lot of people. And we aren't robots. We bring our own vulnerabilities in, our sense of not being good enough, our anxiety about reading a social situation accurately, our fears, our histories. And so with all of that, if someone is being complimentary and sort of seemingly swept away by us, I know, as it is, I'm already the anti-Cupid by saying, run away from too much romance, run away from charisma. But even I can't say, oh, if someone is saying something nice to you, then run away. I'm not going to say it, it's not true. So there's only so tight that red flag radar can be. All of us deserve to be seen and loved and cherished and desired at some point in our lives. And unfortunately, not enough of us are. So when narcissists hand out desire, it's like them passing out bottles of ice water in the desert. We want it, we need it, so we take it, and wanting that and getting swept away with that, that's human. Many times when I've worked with clients who are sort of doing the post-mortem of their narcissistic relationships, they will literally have a look of disgust on their faces when they are describing the story of their own, how they were love bombed. I don't like that for them. It was real when it was real. And part of healing is accepting and being compassionate about our histories, even when we look back and say, how did I fall for that? You didn't see the rest of the story. I mean, listen, Jurassic Park seemed like a good idea until the T-Rex and the Velociraptor came to the party. If it was all Stegosauruses, Jurassic Park would have been a really fun place. Now, if anything, the red flag we need to pay attention to is not the compliments and the desire and the cherishing, but rather the hot, cold, on, off, in, out, cherishing you, and then the next day not returning your text. And then when you say, okay, no, this is not for me, they then say, oh, I'm just afraid of commitment. You're so special. Give me another chance. Nope. The running hot and cold is a sign that the trauma bond is in the house. And if they withdraw, instead of clearly communicating about their fears of commitment, that's its own red flag. It's not limited to just narcissistic people, but that pattern isn't good for anyone. Wanting to be cherished and valued and seen for your beauty or your value, it's not foolish or silly, it's human. Yes, the story may play out badly at the end, but when it was real, it was real. And you made the courageous leap of faith into a new relationship. Healing is all about not shaming yourself and not looking back on the love bombing phase with disdain and contempt for yourself. The only path forward to healing from these relationships is to be able to look at your story and recognize that at that time, not knowing all you were about to learn, you did what you did in good faith. But if you shame that part of yourself, it can make it really difficult to let yourself in some ways off the hook and allow yourself to be taken care of so that the next time you put your hat out in the ring, you are cherishing yourself enough that you won't put up with that hot, cold nonsense that is so classically the narcissistic relationship. This term of grooming, which has some sinister implications, but in its most simple term, grooming is really a process of preparing someone for abuse. It involves establishing trust, playing upon a person's vulnerabilities, and getting then a person into a psychological position where you can more easily prey on them. We hear of this term being used, for example, in all kinds of predatory circles, people who prey on children and on teens, because just by dint of being a child, that renders them vulnerable. But grooming, quite frankly, can happen to someone at any age. What's so frightening, concerning, troubling is that abusers have an uncanny ability to smell out the people who are vulnerable and work with it. So in other words, if they meet someone who's immune to their tricks early on, an abuser will move to a new target because they'll recognize this is not somebody who's sort of a candidate to be groomed. So let me put it out there that I think actually love bombing is a form of grooming, right? Because love bombing in and of itself involves creating a courtship or a seduction designed to get someone into position to be narcissistic supply. Get someone into a position where it's hard for them to get out of the relationship until the love bombers decided that they can be done with them. Get them in a position so the love bomber can control them. Get them into a position where the love bomber can devalue and discard the person, which then feels good for the love bomber because they honestly really do get their identity from being the one who's in charge, from the one to be the one who's dominant. Love bombing is an inherently confusing process. Again, it does play upon vulnerabilities. Because there's so much kind of activity happening during the love bombing stage, it blocks the process of getting to know someone in a well-paced manner so you can make healthy decisions about a relationship. Love bombing is a setup that plays upon early wounds, early yearnings, and early triggers, and makes people vulnerable to falling for someone who is often evocative of early unhealthy relationships. For example, a narcissistic parent. They'll meet someone who's like their narcissistic parent or rejects them like their narcissistic parent, rather than choosing someone who would be a healthy adult partner. It's why even people who have been through therapy and who have done the work can still get played by a love bomber. Those early wounds and those early vulnerabilities never really go away. Love bombing is a term that we are all using. But in the classical example, we often think of the grandiose love bomb, right? The grandiose love bomb is the fancy dinners and the gifts and the vacations and the grand gestures and the person who's like, let's order everything on the menu, or I'm going to send them flowers every day. And
good morning texts and good night texts and social media posts where they write down, I'm the luckiest person in the world, armed with lots of hearts and emojis, and it's forever, baby, after 2 weeks. It's noisy and it's distracting and it blinds you from seeing red flags. And when you question it, you might even feel guilty for being the person who's seeing the bad in what otherwise appears to be a fairy tale situation. But the challenge is this grandiose love bombing is really only a subset of love bombing. Sometimes love bombing is a different process. A person who keeps sharing their stories of woe, of all the things that have gone wrong in their lives, the tragedy of their life story, and letting you know that you're the first person who has ever really seen them and made them feel loved. In some ways, this, what I call quiet love bombing, can be even more lethal. Because those big, noisy dinners out, order everything on the menu, let's go fly here on the third date, those gestures are in your face. While the quiet stuff is more subtle. It doesn't feel grandiose or theatrical. And it really may play on a much more primitive craving to be seen, and to be seen as empathic. Everybody out there has the fantasy and wants to believe that their love can rescue someone. Now, whether the love bombing is quiet or it's noisy, in due time, usually somewhere between 4 to 12 weeks, begins what we call sort of the denouement, the end of the pleasurable part of this journey. The devaluing slowly begins. Narcissists are sprinters. They cannot love bomb forever. They do it until they have you, and then they're done. It's like closing a sale. Have you ever noticed how much less charming the car salesperson becomes once you are done signing the contract? It's pretty instantaneous, right? So with the grandiose love bombers, it's all about telling you that you are not grateful, that you are selfish, and that you are needy. And how dare you expect them to actually sit and chat with you after all they did. So in that point in the love bombings, you're actually trying to make the relationship go deep. They'll treat you like you're ungrateful. And then they might even call you entitled. In fact, the grandiose narcissist, once the initial love bomb is done, might even start calling you narcissistic or selfish or even needy at this point. And because of the cognitive dissonance inherent in all narcissistic relationships, you're going to fall for it. And you're going to second guess yourself and wonder if maybe you were in fact being needy and unfair. And after all, they did do so much for you. If you were quietly love bombed, it may be about the passive aggressive stuff at this point, because that's often a common dynamic after the quiet love bomb. You may believe that this sensitive, wounded person in front of you may actually want to start hearing more about your life. And instead of just always talking about what's going wrong in your lives, maybe you're going to start saying, hey, guess what? Good news. I had this amazing thing happen. And when you start to share, that quiet love bomber might start saying things like, why do you need to share these things that are to me? Why do you need to share these things to me or with me that are happening to you? Why do you have to tell me about all this stuff going on at work? Are you just trying to make me feel bad about myself? And that starts happening enough times that you start censoring yourself. And before you know it, not only do you stop talking about your triumphs, you may even stop even trying to reach them or excel in any way, because you don't want to make your partner feel guilty or sad or bad that their life isn't going as well. And then there are even other types of love bombing you may not even consider to be love bombing. One is the version that I call the lapdog love bomb. Initially, The new person in your life may want to be with you 24/7. Remember, that quick ramp up of a relationship is a very common narcissistic maneuver. They'll call constantly, text constantly. How are you? Where are you? I will fly to where you live. I will drive 20 hours to see you. Show me where you are. By the third date, you may find yourself waking up next to them, or at least waking up to their incessant texts, and the ones you may not have gotten the night before. And that might start happening every single night from there on forward. These relationships often culminate in the too much, too fast. The lapdog love bomb is like, let's get engaged right away. You're my one. You're the one. Let's have a baby. Let's move in. You're my everything. This lightning only strikes once. It may not be grandiose, but if you have vulnerabilities like separation fears, the lapdog love bomb is a real risk, because there is a comfort. This person never leaves your side unless maybe you're going to work, but you never have to deal with the goodbyes because the person never leaves your side. So it really plays on those separation fears. Because there is so much contact between you and this person, it may very well be that basically after 3 months of dating, you have spent more time with this person than couples who have been together for a year, just in terms of time served. And in the lapdog love bomb, these people bleed into your routine in such a way, because they're always there, that you can already start to imagine them integrated into your life. In general, love bombers block the sun, so you can't see the red flags. And whether they do that by sharing their tales of woe, becoming a barnacle or a sticky burr that just won't go away, or the big grand gestures, they really insinuate themselves in quickly. And this can quickly devolve into them massively controlling you, back to the grooming. After weeks of 24/7 contact, you may feel as though you want a break, maybe to just go see friends, to have a night with family. And then that lapdog love bomb will do something like, and say something to you like, are you ashamed of me? Is that why you don't want me to come? Why don't you want to be with me? This, of course, after 24/7 for 3 months. Or they may encourage you to do things like quit a job or go on a jealous rant about you actually wanting to go out and meet someone else, when in fact, you're actually going to just be taking your mom to go out and buy a new dress. Different people are vulnerable to different love bombers. People who love romance or gifts or big gestures or just love, or maybe coming off of a relationship with somebody who was actually pretty cheap or could never remember the little gestures like making a restaurant reservation. People in those kinds of situations may fall for the grandiose love bomb, may want the big story. People who value themselves as empaths and love the sense of identity they derive from helping and hearing about someone else and seeing someone else and helping someone with their demons or rescuing someone else may not even notice that they really aren't being seen by this other person, but the other person is just so open to them. Or that they won't notice that the person around them is chronically victimized and takes little responsibility for their role in their own lives. Those are people who might be more vulnerable to that kind of quiet love bombing. People who have fears of abandonment or separation may fall for someone who never wants to leave their side, the so-called lapdog love bomb. Our histories make us vulnerable and allow for the grooming process that's called love bombing to take place. And the vulnerabilities are why the love bombing actually works. A person who doesn't like grand gestures might actually be relatively put off by all of the grand gestures. And while love bombing is largely a term that sits in the province of romantic relationships, frankly, it has a lot of importance for other relationships too, whether that be friends, family members who might be trying to win you over, colleagues, people like that.
It's commonly a dynamic that we observe in newer relationships, relationships where two people are coming together for the first time. But that doesn't mean that the grooming process that's called love bombing can't exist in existing, it can't happen, I should say, in existing relationships. If a narcissist needs something you have, they will find a way to extract it from you. And so even within a family, the sibling or anything, if they need that thing you've got, you might go through a love bombing experience. So how do we dismantle this process of grooming and love bombing? I'm not really sure. Maybe stop feeding children grandiose fairy tales of rescue during childhood and stop romanticizing these dynamics in adulthood. I don't know, maybe stop equating asking for a need to be met with your neediness, or equating your expression of a need with guilt to break those cycles. Maybe we need to stop viewing red flags as decor, but instead as signals that are really uncomfortable, but they're signals that have to be heeded, like a thunderstorm on a beach day. You may want to stay, but you don't want to get hit. We need to stop pathologizing people who choose not to be in relationships and teaching people to be okay with their own company so that they can be more discerning about choosing a partner when they meet someone. And even with all of this, most of us may very well likely get played at least once. So many people, especially people in narcissistic relationships, get caught in the unending cycle of quid pro quo, feeling like you always owe someone something. That's really a big part of that grooming process, right? You're always going to feel like you owe the narcissist something. Narcissists will play that obligatory obligation card all the time. I did all of this for you. Really? You're going to ask this of me now to actually listen to you? I put a roof over our heads all these years. Why are you asking me these things now? Why do you ask for so much? That's got to be one of the narcissist's favorite questions. And so people feel that they not only can't make a need known in these relationships, but they believe that they can't exit. These relationships almost become like a form of indentured servitude. And it all started with that grooming process called love bombing. Now I'm going to end this video with a great quote by my favorite poet, Rumi, who writes, "Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, 'You owe me.' Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky." Apparently the sun gets it, according to Rumi, but the narcissists don't. So I hope that makes sense of what that process is of love bombing and how it grooms a person, takes advantage of their vulnerabilities, and creates a long-term sense of stuckness where a person is now in a situation that's very psychologically precarious. What do you think about this idea? And I have an argument with you about it, but I really think that why love bombing works and is so dangerous, it kind of turns us into kids, into little children when it happens, which makes us more vulnerable to the narcissist. So let's talk about that. So I really do. I was thinking about this other day. Someone was telling me about a love bombing story. I was like, I kind of believe that all love bombing makes us a little childlike. Let me think about it. Someone's buying us presents or sending us lots of affectionate messages, maybe hugs us and holds us or gets us our favorite foods. I mean, that's sort of the stuff of child fantasies, right? It ticks the boxes of being seen, cherished, loved, valued. And in the midst of those feelings, we might feel like children, or the way we wish we felt like children, right? There's something about love bombing, though, which is very domination oriented. So, in essence, feeling like a child under those circumstances only improves the domination experience for the love bomber. The love bomber sets the course of the seduction however they want it to be, and we receive it. Again, domination. So while we may be living our grown-up lives outside of the relationship, going to work, driving a car, running a household, when we get that swept away love bombing feeling, we're kind of rendered into children. We even giggle and blush and ooh and ah when we're being love bombed. I guess it's all really sweet at one level. In our stressy lives, feeling like a child is wonderful and it's an escape, but damn, it makes us vulnerable. Our defenses come down. A sort of psychological immaturity may temporarily pervade us while we are being love bombed. Not in a bad way, but in a sort of giggly, let's go make snow angels way, right? So it's sweet, but it's also risky because we may put blind faith into the love bomber, like the same way a child would do with an adult. We may fall into simplistic child thoughts like, I'm safe, so everything's going to be okay because they're taking care of me. We may not be sufficiently self-advocating, and at least in this relationship, may lose some of our adult power because why? We turn into kids. Listen, I think it's wonderful when an adult feels safe enough to be able to feel like a child for a minute, to be in the moment in the way only children can, to be fully absorbed in a sandcastle or a game. But when children aren't safe, that's not a great place to be. Children have so little power. They can't file for divorce from unfit parents. They can't call and retain an attorney. So a child's lack of power, as many of you as survivors of childhood narcissistic abuse know, it's not a happy place necessarily, but it goes a step further. While this love bombing and feeling like a child can be very powerful, the other thing that happens during love bombing is that we start sharing vulnerabilities and secrets. And this is why those big shares in the early part of a relationship, especially during love bombing, although it all seemingly fosters this idea of closeness and intimacy, with a narcissist, this can be dangerous because those things you share, your vulnerabilities, your secrets, they will be weaponized and used against you down the road when the devalue and discard phases set in, and they will set in. Now, while narcissistic romantic partners are the greatest transgressors when it comes to love bombing, listen, anyone can do it. Someone trying to lure you to come work with them at their company or get you involved in a new business. They could try to love bomb you. A new friend might try to love bomb you. Even a family member who wants something from you might do that. Now, while romantic love bombing is the most potent and causes sort of the most, if you will, regression in us, anything where we feel like we go backwards and feel like children with a narcissist present is risky. Because when you think back to childhood, as long as we wanted to believe in Santa Claus as kids, we suspended disbelief. Because the alternative was a lot more cynical and a lot less magical. Mom and dad have to run to Target in traffic to get us some stuff. Not so fun. We all desperately want a little magic and a little childhood. I actually don't fully know how a person can be fully possessed of their own adult selves while being love bombed, right? I think the only way you could do it is awareness, sort of a hedge against getting too swept away by the love bombing because you're aware, and knowing you're being love bombed, so you can pay attention to what's happening. So you can let your adult mind keep an eye out for the red flags while your child mind enjoys the ride for a minute. And be well aware all along that there's no sort of proverbial Santa Claus. Go ahead and make the snow angels. Don't share your vulnerabilities. That's the balance. When you were a child, like all children, you, me, all of us, we lived in some kind of fantasy world. It's what kids do. And in children's fantasies, they feel powerful and special. So here's what I'm doing. I'm going to share some of the childhood fantasies I was thinking about as I was laying out this video. I had a fantasy that I'd get a prize at school for being smart, like a medal or a trophy, something physical. Because then my parents would notice me and they would proudly display said medal or trophy. And then the other children would end up really liking me because I had this medal. Obviously, none of this happened. That was why it was a fantasy. So let me go a step further. Please don't weaponize the vulnerabilities I'm sharing with you. So when I was a kid, my folks struggled a bit financially. So when I was young, even something that cost like $5 was not a discretionary expense that they could ever manage. Now, I remember I had a comic book, and I read it like 100 times. And in the back of the comic book, there were advertisements mostly for like novelties and gags, like whoopee cushions and handshake buzzers. And one of the things there in the back of the comic book was a hover car you could make. It cost more than anything on the page. It cost $6.95. but to give you a sense of my child fantasy world. I believed that that car was big enough for a person to get into, and with its hover abilities, would allow me that if I had it, I could get in it and quickly get away from the kids who were bullying me because I was not able to run fast enough, and one of them had stolen my bike. So I thought I could climb into the hover car, hit the remote control, and drive away for $6.95. Years later, I found the comic book, and obviously I saw that it was not a car you could get into, but it was some sort of tiny little remote control thing about the size of a deck of cards, and I'm sure it didn't work. But when I thought back to that fantasy, what were my fantasies with the metal and all of that? Fitting in, being seen, escape, and fantasy. Those were mine. And for a second, think about yours. What were your childhood escapist fantasies? Because right there, that's where the love bomber could hit you hard. Think of your childhood fantasy space as an Achilles heel, a gap in the fence where someone can sneak in and hurt you. So based on my childhood fantasy, if somebody wanted to love bomb me, the person who would do it best would hit those vulnerabilities. They'd tell me I'm smart and I'm funny, and they'd listen when I talk to them. And Lord have mercy, if someone bought me a hover car, I hate to think what I would put up with. But anyone doing those things that play on my sense of belonging and safety, I'd be putty in their hands. I love feeling like a child. I'm sure all of us do. But be aware that love bombing kind of regresses us like that. So think of yourself as a child who also has the ability, if you are being love bombed, to also not surrender your judgment and your discernment. So play with that a little. Think about those things. And I have to tell you, when I was thinking about this video, I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about the hover car. But then I realized what mattered to me was safety and escape. And I also knew that anybody who might be able to take care of me that way, I would regress, and my monitoring wouldn't be as good. Think about that for yourself, and think about too, when somebody makes us feel as special as they do when we're being love bombed, we run the real risk of kind of going backwards in our mind and rendering ourselves vulnerable to somebody who's actually quite dangerous for us. So let's talk about the very important difference. The difference between being cherished and being desired. There are so many challenges to the narcissistic romantic relationship, right? The love bombing, the trauma bonded stuckness, the self-blame, the rumination. All of it is confusing and leaves people sort of being pulled in to unhealthy relationships, losing themselves, and then struggling with healing and recovery. So let's talk about a theme that actually was a theme that it's one of those things that woke me up in the middle of the night. Just a word of advice to all of you professionally: don't be someone who focuses on narcissism as a career all the time. In a way, it's like working on this all the time is like a bad smell you can't get out of your hair. And I think about this all the time. I think about it morning, noon, and night. I actually keep a little, like a piece of paper by my bedside because I actually get woken up with bad dreams and ideas. This is actually one of these ideas. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about it. I'm grateful to be helping people understand this, but I gotta tell you, it's a difficult thing to think about all the time. So the thing I woke up thinking about was the vulnerabilities that people have. And this is often a relic of childhood. And it's actually something that we've done a video about a while ago. But the vulnerabilities people have to basically being desired, right? Something that so many people want, because it's such a universal want, is to be wanted. A romantic relationship creates this in a very specific way. We may love someone, but we always love, but we also love being wanted or the desire that somebody has for us. It's in many ways, it's sort of an interesting throwback to infancy, that wanting to be fully enveloped, and even into childhood, where we want so much to be so seen, so heard, and so valued. So this is where narcissistic people and the love bombing of it all are so problematic. In the love bombing stage, narcissistic folks are so good at wanting, at desiring, and more specifically, they're so good at desiring you. People will describe that early in a narcissistic relationship, they heard things they've never heard before. Intense things like the narcissistic person saying to them, I've never felt like this before. I've never met anyone like you. I can't stop thinking about you. You are my everything. I could stare at you all day. They may tell you they love you within a few days or a few weeks after meeting you. And they're also really good at physical desire, wanting to have intense sexual experiences with you, really a lot of physical touch, wanting to push sexual limits. All of this gets filed under desire, that intense wanting, intense longing, the intense needing. Narcissists, I got to tell you, they've got the desire game wired because desire serves the desirer. It may feel very flattering if you're the desiree, but it's not really a two-way street. The person who's doing the desiring many ways want something, and they do what they need to get it. And because the narcissistic person is really a big desirer, they desire supply, they desire validation. And at the moment of love bombing, you are the source of that. They desire you, and they desire what you bring, supply. Desire can get manifested as, I don't know, like making love on the kitchen table, which sounds really uncomfortable, but that's sort of the trope, right? That exciting sexual experience. Desire is love letters every day or text messaging all day. Desire is big proclamations of love, like, I need you so much. You are my everything. I can't live without you. All of this intense desire does reflect the needs of the desirer. You just happen to be along for the very pleasurable and fun ride of being desired. To be desired feels like somebody really wants you, that they love you, but it misses the boat a bit. Because what desire does is it sets the tone for an egocentric relationship from the jump. The relationship feeds the narcissistic person's desire, and more importantly, the narcissistic person's needs. Desire is sort of like a flame that burns really bright initially, but as it burns down to a more soothing ember, well, that's when it's not so exciting. And when a narcissistic person stops being interested, so that constant quest for desire is why narcissistic folks are actually so prone to infidelity, that sort of novelty seeking. They want to feel all that exciting desire again. They want what they want and they become consumed with it. But more than anything, narcissistic folks really want that big, bright flame. So, if the desire is what is getting people stuck in narcissistic relationships or being the recipient of that desire, then what is the healthy thing that we should be hoping for instead of desire? Because we're all being told, desire, woohoo, that's the thing you want. I'm going to try this. I believe that the healthier relationship model is to be cherished. And obviously, cherishing is a two-way street, that two people cherish each other. To be cherished is quite different than desire. To be cherished is to be valued, to be safe and protected, to be cared about. To cherish someone is to be aware of their needs in a way such that you sort of meet people where they are at. You don't push them to do things that are uncomfortable or rush them. You just take good care of them. To cherish someone means to balance your needs with someone else's, that idea of mutuality. Desiring is overtaking someone. Cherishing is caring for someone. We don't sufficiently, I don't think, romanticize cherishing. In healthy relationships, cherish is what slowly follows from the sizzle of those early weeks, the early dates. The problem is that the early phase of the narcissistic relationship, love bombing, is followed by devaluing and discarding, not cherishing. Maybe people hope that love bombing will turn into cherishing, but I don't even think most people know to hope to be cherished. To be desired is so primal and so overwhelming that in some ways people just want the bigness and the brightness of it. Ordinary life doesn't always coexist well with desire. Desire takes up a lot of energy. It's really hard to keep up the pace of gift giving, experiences, intense sex, intense texts, intense proclamations of, well, you're my soulmate and the love, I love you a million different ways, while you're actually having to live in the real world of work deadlines and taking care of people and paying bills and doing laundry. When the relationship actually becomes real, the stuff of day-to-day life, the real stress, just life, that's usually when a narcissist cut emotional bait. But sadly, they'll often stick around physically for that point, and you wonder, why is there no emotionality here? It's really important that people learn the fine art of cherishing and of being cherished. Being cherished, maybe it's not nearly as exciting as being desired. And sadly, trauma bonding often means that the gentleness and deliberateness of being cherished is often written off as dull or unexciting. Yet, a relationship that starts with cherishing, those are often the relationships that stand the test of time. In all my days, I have never seen a narcissistic person be able to engage in cherishing. I've actually tried to explain it and why it's so good to narcissistic individuals who have often written me off and they've said, that's dumb. Or things like, what do I look like? Like I'm 90 years old? No thanks. That sounds like a yawn to me. Or even, what's the point? Remember, cherishing requires empathy, self-awareness, valuation of the other person, the willingness to make adjustments for another person. None of these things are possible with narcissism, and society doesn't help. Most cinematic or television courtships are big, big flowers and marriage proposals that look like carnivals or flying to the other side of the world to proclaim love or passionate, exciting sex or overly effusive Instagram posts or charismatic power couple stuff. Cherishing doesn't look so exciting. Every so often I've seen a movie or a TV show capture it. I got to tell you, the movies and TV shows that tend to capture it tend to be sort of sweet, independent film projects that I think much fewer people watch, and definitely almost no narcissist will ever watch. When those stories are there, I actually really love them, when you can sort of see that they put the time into telling a love story that's about cherishing. Cherishing isn't glamorous. It's actually just responsive. What does cherishing look like? Listening. Really listening. And shaping awareness around that. I'll give you an example. You may share a vulnerability, and the other person in the relationship with you attempts to ensure that you're kept safe in the face of that vulnerability. Let's say you tell someone, I'm terrified to swim in the ocean. They don't try to push you into it. They hear you if you're scared of it. Cherishing is listening to the small things that you say you might value, like the trash cans being put out. And then you see that they were, without them making a big deal of it. Cherishing is about making compromises. I don't know, let's say, for example, you have an old friend who just at the last minute you find out they're coming into town on the same weekend that you had planned something with your partner. And your partner works with you to help figure out a way to manage both without throwing a tantrum about, how could you choose your friend? Cherishing is about not pushing you sexually or physically in a way that feels uncomfortable. Cherishing is about never weaponizing your vulnerabilities. Cherishing is about not competing with you in a way because they feel threatened by you. Even let's say your success might be eclipsing theirs, that they actually just enjoy that you're succeeding. Now, cherishing has to be a two-way street. It can't be a relationship where one person cherishes the other. Because in a healthy relationship, feeling cherished, it becomes a mirror. It pulls it from us. We want it to be a two-way street. Sadly, what I see in many narcissistic relationships is that I hear that the narcissist really brings big desire during the love bombing phase, while the other person actually does bring cherishing. That desire on one side, cherishing on another, doesn't work so well. Because if you're the cherisher, you end up as the caregiver and the compromise maker and the flexible one, and they just keep overwhelming you with big proclamations of love and perhaps acrobatic sex. I don't know. In childhood, I do believe that not enough people were cherished. Narcissistic or distracted or invalidating parents do not cherish. Maybe every so often they become kind of interested in you, maybe at a birthday party or a holiday, Christmas morning or something, or when you score the goal or bring them validation or get some award. And that's interesting because in a way it sets the tone for overvaluing the intense dynamics of desire. Short-lived moments of feeling your parents actually cared, and that you always want to keep, you always feel like you have to keep chasing for. That feels exciting when that comes along. And rather than what's healthy, which is the daily knowing that you're special and important and cherished. For all of you, please understand the difference between being desired and being cherished, because our vulnerabilities to wanting to be wanted, to wanting to be desired, often reflect a mashup of what society tells us courtship is supposed to look like. Our sort of wanting to be kind of, woof, like I said, enveloped in a way that perhaps we didn't get in childhood. And the dynamics of desire serve as a curtain that blocks us from seeing red flags and allows the cognitive dissonance to get us stuck in an undesirable space that's really hard to get out of. All of us and all of you deserve to be cherished. Please hold out for that. Maybe in the day-to-day, cherished is soft, it's quiet, it looks a little bit more like sweatpants and chicken soup. And that is the stuff of life and the relationships that are there, supportive and growth-oriented for a lifetime. Thanks again. 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 Thanks.